of the world. Welcome you all in this World Water Week event on sustainable and fair water footprint, a global call to action for COP26. This event is organized and co-organized, initiated by the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office of the United Kingdom in partnership with K4D, ANEW, CDP, the Dutch government, the Swiss government, and Water Witness. We have an amazing panel where we will focus on the necessity of this water footprint network and the water footprint work around the world. It's a complex challenge, but it is massive. But before I go into further detail, I will hand the floor to Minister Goldsmith for his message and his call to action. Minister Goldsmith, the floor is yours.
Thank you to the Stockholm International Water Institute for inviting me to say a few words. We're proud to be working closely with Sweden on so many initiatives, from the campaign to protect at least 30% of the world's land and ocean by 2030 to the Global Water Partnership itself. And it's worth reminding ourselves of the backdrop against which this meeting is happening, because we're causing unprecedented damage to the natural world on which each and every one of us depends. And although we will all pay the cost, it's the poorest who depend most directly on the free services that nature provides and who therefore suffer first and worst as they begin to fail. Forests, for example, underpin the livelihoods of 1 billion people, but we're destroying them at a rate of 30 football pitches per minute. The ocean supports a similar number of people, and just as we're stripping it of life at a terrifying rate, we're filling it with trash just as quickly. More than half the world's agricultural land is already degraded, and diminishing yields are affecting 500 million small farms. And all of this, of course, against the backdrop of worsening climate change. So there can be nothing more important than turning this grim trajectory around. And as we know, the longer we leave it, the more expensive it will become to tackle for everyone. So as presidents of COP26 and the G7, we're putting nature at the heart of our response to climate change. And a core part of that agenda is water. Clearly, none of us can live without water, yet globally 700 million people face water scarcity every single day. 4.3 billion people live with water scarcity at least 1 month every year, and that number is rising. And so too is the cost. Poor water supply and sanitation, damage to crops, and urban flooding cost $480 billion a year. And just as nature-based solutions could provide around a third of the most cost-effective solutions to climate change, and at a far lower cost than conventional alternatives, so too are many of the best solutions to the water crisis found in protecting and restoring natural systems. So donor countries do, of course, invest a great deal in water, but the focus has been very narrow. We pursue clean water delivery targets, but without thinking about where that water will come from, where the dirty water is going to go, and what impact climate change will have on water security. So if we're serious about water security, we need to protect and restore nature, from the great mountain water towers to the world's biggest rainforests. Nature-based solutions can pay their way up to 6 times over, as well as being less prone to corruption, more sustainable, and more likely to provide jobs and lasting livelihoods. But globally, as little as 1% of investment in water security is currently focused on nature-based solutions. So around the world, we have an abundance of examples of projects that have worked with nature and delivered for people. Nature-based solutions, for example, have kept clean water flowing from the Catskill Mountains into New York since the 1930s, without the huge costs of purification. In Vietnam, owners of small hydro plants pay communities that own forests to keep them healthy and standing, to avoid siltation and ruination of their equipment. In Pakistan, hydroelectric companies are working working with local communities to improve soil retention upstream. And in the UK, water companies are paying farmers to manage their lands, to slow the flow of water and increase absorbability, not least to reduce the need for capital investment in concrete defences downstream. Direct government support via ODA is clearly very important, but we cannot do the job without also harnessing the immense power of the market. So I'm absolutely delighted that the UK's Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure has produced water reporting standards for our companies and investors that will become compulsory by 2025. We're already working on making sure that food imports don't increase water stress beyond our own borders, especially in drought-prone areas. And the Adaptation Action Coalition's Water Tracker can help us take inspiration from the brilliant solutions around the world that are already helping people who share a water source work together to protect it. Ahead of COP26 and alongside Switzerland, the Netherlands and others, we're launching a global call for action towards sustainable and fair water footprints. We need government, business, civil society and academics working together to integrate good water stewardship into supply chains for everything from textiles and critical minerals to food. And as COP presidents, we are absolutely committed to continuing to work with you to turn best practice into the norm and secure access to clean water for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honourable Minister Goldsmith, for your inspiring remarks. Thank you also for your leadership on the issue of the water footprint and, of course, on the leadership towards COP26. And finding an opportunity to bring water, which is at the heart of climate change impact, also at the heart of COP26, with a water pavilion and many actions forward. The win to raise resiliency and to harness the transformative power of water for education, health and well-being, livelihoods, jobs and inclusive growth, climate adaptation and clean energy, biodiversity and nature-based solutions. That is what the minister was addressing. You have to join our call to action. And this call to action is focusing on no pollution, sustainable water withdrawal, protection of nature, access to safe water, sanitation and hygiene, and resiliency to drought, floods and water conflicts. Over 40% of Europe's water footprint lies outside its border. So we have to look at the water footprint and not only at how we consume. We consume water and we produce, and we have to come together. This event, as said, initiated by the UK government, will try to initiate a dialogue between consumer and producer country representatives from government, businesses and civil society, with the aim of launching a partnership at COP26 to increase sustainable water use and climate resiliency globally. This political coalition will work collaboratively on the ground to reduce unsustainable water use, using supply chain reporting, disclosure reporting, etc., etc., etc. And importantly, consumer country measures such as due diligence regulations, consumer awareness, raising campaigning, and more. This would lead to drafting and negotiating a political agreement, a declaration that could be signed at COP26, with a small fanfare perhaps, or a bigger moment at the United Nations 2023 Water Conference, with other stepping stones along the way. It has to involve everybody, businesses, civil society, academia and investors, and needs partnerships to move this forward. This is what this event will about. We will explore how such a partnership would look like. We also will identify next stepping stones. And we are happy that yesterday, together with the Alliance for Water Stewardship and the CEO Water Mandate, the German government launched the Water Stewardship Forum, Acceleration Forum, WASA. So that is a stepping stone. We are very happy that Kate Lamb, as a climate and water champion for COP26, secured a slot at COP26 in the Water Pavilion on November 5th as the horizon stepping stone. I'm very honored that the UK government will actually announce in this event, a Chatham House event, in the beginning of October. And the link to that will be provided to all of you alongside this event. And we'll invite you to join the Chatham House Rule, again, a stepping stone towards a water secure world. That said, and before I introduce the fantastic panel we have to talk about this water footprint network, we will look at a short video on water footprinting made by Water Witness International. Gary, please, the video. Thank you.
How fair is your water footprint? Nearly everything we buy takes a huge amount of water to produce. It takes 200 litres of water to make just one glass of orange juice. 8,000 litres of water to put together just one pair of jeans. And 12,000 litres of water goes into making your mobile phone. Put another way, the average UK household uses 2 bathtubs full of water each day through taps and toilets, and 72 bathtubs via the water embedded in the food and other goods it consumes. Often these are grown or made in places where water is in short supply or which face an increasingly chaotic climate. Where water is used irresponsibly within our water footprints, we are driving water crises. Where farms overdraw groundwater to irrigate crops, we increase the risk of drought and water conflict. Where metal mines produce toxic pollution, we push nature to the edge of extinction. And where factories overuse and pollute local water sources, we deny local communities the human right to safe water and sanitation. Research suggests that over 50% of the UK's water footprint is unsustainable, contributing to degradation and depletion of other people's water. But our water footprints don't have to be a bad thing. In fact, when water is used responsibly, our consumption creates much needed jobs, green growth and resilience to climate change, which gives you power and influence over how the world's water is used. A fair water footprint means no pollution, sustainable withdrawals, access to safe water supplies, toilets and hand washing, protecting and working with nature, and planning for droughts and floods. So it's time for all of us to demand a fair water footprint by asking companies for evidence of their responsible water use. Certification against the Alliance for Water Stewardship standard is a reliable sign of good practice. Asking your bank and pension fund to sign up to the CDP's Water Disclosure Programme, to end financial support for water abusers and to target investment toward responsible water stewards. Letting your MPs know about the need for a fair water footprint and demanding their support for stronger laws at home and abroad. Join the Fair Water Footprint campaign at our website and help us to investigate and expose bad practice. Act now for a fair water footprint and join the global struggle for climate and water justice.
Thank you, Water Witness, and a new amazing inspirational video, but also putting exactly the frame on where we have to have this discussion. The way we consume and produce today is we do it in an unsustainable but also unequal way, and it will only increase our vulnerability in the years to come with climate change and a growing population at risk. It's good to have so many participants. You can ask your questions in the chat on the Pathable platform. They will be used in the dialogue. And now it's my honor to go and introduce our panelists. Happy to see that they all joined. I start with an introduction of all before I hand over the first question in the same order. We have with us Sareen Malik, Executive Secretary of the African Civil Society Network for Water and Sanitation, and Vice Chair for the Steering Committee of the SWA Partnership. We also have Minister Nancy Tembo, Minister for Forestry and Natural Resources, and a Member of Parliament in Malawi, graduated of the University of Malawi and served as Commissioner for the Malawi Electoral Commission. And we have Malik, country coordinator for the Alliance for Water Stewardship in Pakistan, Pakistan coordinator for AWS, where she leads AWS engagement with multi-stakeholders and contributes towards wider development of Alliance for Water Stewardship across South Asia. And Simon Zbinden, head Global Water Program as the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, head of the Global Program Water Division at the Swiss Agency, a unit of the Swiss federal government, Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. He held several positions with SDC. He has a water heart. And Willem Uyen, I think you're with us. You can rename yourself by hovering over your image. You see 3 white dots in a blue frame, and then people will understand that host 500 is actually Willem, the sponsor of the Water Stewardship Program and head of supply chain South Asia at Unilever. And last but not least, Francesco Corto, global head of research at DWS in London, joined the company in 1998. He served as a European strategist before and a senior global strategist and involved in the major developments of CRO/CI, including company analysis, equity market strategy, and investment projects. So you see, we have people from all fields and backgrounds in society. Look forward to the debate. And I have some questions for you to answer, and I'll go over them one by one, and I'll take the round, and we'll see where we get, because as with all these sessions at World Water Week Stockholm, there is a hard stop in the end. And probably we have much more to discuss, but luckily, thanks to FCDO, the UK government, we have many steps ahead to continue our conversation. But first to you, Sareen, Malik. This question is for all of you. What are your recommendations to drive this call to action towards sustainable and fair water footprints? Maheen, the floor is yours. Sareen, sorry, the floor is yours.
No, I understand the confusion. We do share the first.
2 Maliks.
The same names, yes, 2 Maliks on the panel. One from Kenya, one from Pakistan. Thank you very much, Henk, and thank you all for having us over here. Thank you to Minister Goldsmith for his continued leadership and continued efforts for really building the political will and commitment around water issues and nature-based solutions, which I know he has zeroed in on. Thank you for this call to action for fair water prints and giving us the opportunity. And on behalf of ANEW, our 47 members and the 422 million people living in poverty in Africa, for whom we seek water and climate justice, we thank you again for the opportunity to speak. Now, picking up from Minister Goldsmith's speech, the one key word is textile. And last week, Water Witness published the report, How Fair is Fashion Footprint, really unpacking a bit the damage of the textile industry in Africa in regards to water. Now, in it, we expose the destructive impacts of global fashion industry on Africa's water and workforce. We find that in some of the most vulnerable countries and communities in Africa, Madagascar, Lesotho, Tanzania, and Mauritius, production of clothing for the high streets of Europe is causing horrific levels of pollution and undermining the human right to water and sanitation. Yes, they show how the opportunity for creating decent jobs for millions of people, especially women, and I know this is something that you mentioned, Henk, is being squandered by a lack of due diligence and neglect in the supply chains of the UK, the US, and the Europe. And it also shows how unfair water footprints are throwing fuel on the fires of Africa's problems, exacerbated by the pandemic on water, climate, inequitable growth, disease, and the loss of biodiversity. So there's really no better example as to why we need immediate action. The research is also showing that 55% of the UK's water footprint is currently unsustainable. So there is quite a bit that we need to do. The research also shows that the hands of our governments and regulators are often tied, even with the best of intention. Jobs, investments, and export revenue are so badly needed that it is almost impossible to burden job-creating factories with the costs of pollution control when the markets punish increased costs by immediately shifting production over the border. It is globalized supply chain and the multinationals and global financiers which control them and which are driving the race to the bottom of Africa's water barrel. And therefore, here where the change must come from first. So to the run-up of COP26, There is, again, a generation of opportunity to make fair water footprints and responsible water use as the business norm rather than the exception. These solutions need to end water abuse and to embed resilient use throughout our globalized economy, which are already at hand. I know that Mr. Goldsmith has mentioned again the issue of nature-based solutions, but at the center of these solutions, people must be at the center of all the solutions and all the recommendations that we're going to draw up today. Some of them, multinationals and the factories and farms producing them, must adopt transparent water stewardship standards, something that is really gaining momentum, and we call on private sector and enterprises and partnerships to really explore and engage in water stewardship. Those who profit from our water footprints, the banks, pension funds, and investors must be held to account for due diligence, the advancement of human rights, and nature-based solutions. Governments of consuming and producing countries must enforce good water stewardship and legislate to ensure that business respect water throughout their supply chains, no matter where they operate. And civil society groups and the media must have the freedoms and resources needed to investigate, to speak out, and snap at the heels of business and government to make these change happen. We often talk about our shrinking civic space. We talked about it last year, and we keep talking about it as well this year. And to drive all this, we need individuals and communities to demand change to make their fair water footprints. So we therefore welcome and join Lord Goldsmith's call for fair water footprints. It is overdue, and it must be followed by rapid and radical action. The reach, influence, and power of our globalized supply chains are a threat to sustainable growth and climate justice, but if properly harnessed, can be a force for progress. And finally, to add credibility to this call, the UK government must reverse its devastating aid cuts and step up to play a bold leadership role to reshape corporate and investor behavior. We stand ready to play our part by bringing light to water injustices, being the foot soldiers on the ground, representing the most vulnerable communities, bringing voice from the most marginalized and the invisible to the fore. We support this call to action, and we join us in a giant leap towards fairer water footprints for a fairer water future. Thank you.
Thanks, Sareen. Many issues you brought to the table that I think are all of critical importance if we want to turn this into a success. What I really liked about your comment is next to being fair water footprint, the norm and accountability and everything we have to do to step up our actions and hold ourselves accountable, you put people at the core of this action. And that is really focusing on how can we ensure an enabling environment that can deal with a fair water footprint that goes beyond the coalitions we have towards the informal parts of our world and communities, but also mirroring the formal aspects of our world. So enabling environment of critical importance with people at the center. Thank you, Sareen, but also thanks for your dedication. Minister Nancy Tembo, Your Excellency, the floor is yours, also for you. The same question. What are your recommendations to drive this call to action towards sustainable and fair water footprints? The floor is yours, Minister Tembo.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on in this discussion. For us, we support a global call to action for sustainable and fair water footprint. But most importantly, is in our discussion today is a fair water footprint for both producer and consumer countries around the world. Malawi is a producer country with most annual exports being agricultural commodities. Top ones for exports being sugar, tobacco, and nuts, having a water footprint amounting to 7% of the total water use of Malawi. We therefore know very well that sustainable water management is critical not only in securing jobs, protecting the environment, and growing our economy, but also in positioning our economy as a competitive player on the market, on the global market. Malawi is already feeling the effects of climate change. Over the past 2 decades, Malawi has experienced high frequency of floods and droughts affecting millions of people. However, as a producer country, we remain optimistic, encouraged both by the commitment of our government to sustainable management of resources and by positive experiences of good water stewardship in Malawi. For instance, in the southern part of Malawi, our biggest smallholder tea cooperative responsible for over 60% of Malawi's smallholder tea production, is driving water stewardship strategies both at work, sites, and catchment level. Some of those strategies being used are monitoring water use and water quality, protecting nature, and increasing access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene. As a result, they have increased water and livelihood security and stronger climate resilience. Such credible stewardship by companies, factories, farms is a positive way forward to ensure that water footprint are sustainable, resilient, fair, and a driver of positive change. Nevertheless, as a producer country, we must protect and sustainably use our water resources revenue in the face of climate change. This is being achieved actually by promoting water harvesting, restoration of our landscapes, especially along riverbanks, to increase water availability and access, and promoting sustainable water withdrawals through optimization of water use, amongst others. As a producer and consumer countries, the global call to action encourages us to come together, to act decisively, and join efforts to ensure our water footprint of humanity is sustainable. To that end, fairness regarding water footprint between producer and consumer countries around the world is supposed to be encouraged, and we have to find strategies to ensure that we maintain a fair footprint. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Tembo, and thanks also for your emphasis on women, and I suppose also girls. There is actually a direct question in the chat to you, what your goal would be towards COP to reach the youth, the young. You could almost expand on the last part of your speech, where you really talked about this gender issue. If there's anything you want to add on the hopes for COP and the goal to connect with the young, let us know.
You want me to respond to that now?
Yeah, you can immediately respond. Yeah.
Oh, well, the young people have a core responsibility in this. For us here in Malawi, the young people are leading by example. They are the ones that I talked about landscape restoration especially along riverbanks, and they have been doing this. And as we go to COP26, the youth must be at the forefront of championing these issues. If we're going to maintain the footprint, a fair footprint, we have to involve the youth in those programs.
Thank you, Minister. We will make sure that the youth also not only has a say, but a leading role, because that's going to be of critical importance. Thanks so much. Go to our third speaker, Maheen Malik from Pakistan. Maheen, the same question for you. What are your recommendations to drive this call to action towards sustainable and fair water footprints? The floor is yours, Maheen.
Thank you, Henk, for the question, and greetings, everyone. I am Maheen Malik, and I work for Alliance for Water Stewardship. I did prepare 2 slides, if we could have them right now. Thank you. I wanted to also make sure, and thank you for this opportunity that I'm speaking. So basically at AWS, we are the custodians of a sustainability standard system for water stewardship with a mission to ignite and nurture global and local leadership in credible water stewardship. Our system enables users to make credible claims through independent certification against a globally applicable standard. We are long-term partners of the STC water program. With their support, we've been able to drive action on water footprints of some of the world's largest water-dependent companies. The AWS standard asks users to follow a set of defined actions arranged under 5 steps. These steps have been designed to lead to 5 positive water outcomes. Both the steps and the outcomes are shown on the slide here, as all of you can see. The users of our standard are typically businesses, sites like factories, farms, and production units. Often these users are introduced to the AWS system by their global brands that they supply to. Next slide, please. I'll illustrate this via my experience of working with the textile sector in Pakistan. For Pakistan to kind of continue doing business with other countries, it is important to build resilience. And not just as a requirement of the consumer, but also for business continuity. The AWS standard offers a way for brands to understand the actions of their suppliers in tackling local water challenges, and for producers to know that they're following global best practice. Under one such collaboration, we have an example of a collaboration of WWF Pakistan and International Labour Organization, where we are facilitating the textile and the leather industries in adopting and implementing the AWS standard. Initially, 4 sites have been certified in Pakistan, 2 by US Group in Lahore, and 2 of Surti Enterprises in Karachi. The experience of these producers have actually stimulated interest in AWS from major buying brands, including Primark, H&M, and Gap. The interest of these buyer companies is in turn motivating more and other SME producers who want to supply to these brands. So we create a snowball effect where brands, SMEs, and other actors engage with AWS and as well as each other to better understand how water stewardship can address and can help them address water challenges in their value chain. So for any of you who is interested in knowing more about AWS, the standard, and how the standard kind of helps tackle company water footprints, they can get in touch with me. I can put my email address in the chat, or they could log on to our website, which is www.a4ws.org. So kind of to round it up, I would say the recommendation from me to the organizations who want to work with water and enthusiastic, I would recommend them to join Alliance for Water Stewardship and kind of take up the standard and adopt AWS standard as a good practice. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maheen. Also, amazing example, not only on how to do this through this standard, this coalition and partnership, but also giving it an opportunity to bring it to scale. And I think that is of critical importance, and perhaps I'll get back to you for that. Fourth speaker of the panel, Simon Zbinden from the Swiss government. Simon, also for you, and thanks for your partnership, not only in this, but also in many other water-related issues. What are your recommendations to drive this call to action towards sustainable and fair water footprints?
Thank you, Henk. Thank you, the organizers, for having me also on this very important event in view of the global call to action for the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow. We are from Switzerland's government. We're delighted to work with you, with the government of Britain, but also with the Dutch government and other countries' governments on water stewardship and water-related disclosure, but also, as we do today, on water footprint. It's really time to do so. Let me first put a few facts. Switzerland is really a consumer country, and we have estimates that suggest that 82% of our water footprint is made outside our borders. Despite the fact that we are abundant in water, and we're sometimes even called it's the Europe's water tower, and yet our water footprint is really made outside. This is largely due to our low level of self-sufficiency in food, as other countries, not like other countries, do not have as much land, and so a lot of food is imported. That obviously increases our water footprint outside our own borders. And we do unfortunately not have an estimate or studies what part of this footprint is as unsustainable, but it's plausible to believe that our water footprint is the level of unsustainability is comparable to the one of Britain, where we have a study which is 55%. It is considerable. And as a result, yes, Switzerland, we as a country, as an enterprise, but also as an individual consumer, we are contributing to unsustainable use and add water stress elsewhere on this planet. So now we have heard a lot of what should we do, and I think we all agree what should we do. I think there we have a large consensus, even beyond this community here. But the problem is, how are we going to do this? And that's the more trickier part. For triggering sustainable, equitable, and resilient water management through globalized value chains, we believe we first need reliable and trustful information to connect the place where the water footprint is made with those consumers who trigger it on the other side of the planet. We have methodology, we have a set of standardized approaches which allow us to quantify and trace the water footprints of countries and companies, but also even for individual products and services. But we need trust. We need trust in this if we are about to change or trigger change at the consumer, at the consumption level. And this is a precondition. Reliability, trustworthiness is a precondition. Information is a precondition, but it will not suffice. Water footprint can ultimately trigger efficiency gains, can cause to efficiency gains. That's what we want. However, efficiency gains, efficiency alone will not save the planet. If the whole world lives very efficiently or consumes in a very efficient way, but uses as much water as we do here in Western Europe, we still need 5 planets, or maybe we need 3 planets, still too many. So if we have to look beyond efficiency, as we do need to look beyond efficiency and other things. And the fair water footprint actually is kind of a first approach. What implies fairness? Fairness implies we need to look at the people where the footprint is made. We need to prioritize water users. We need to prioritize access to water and sanitation right away. That's the first level, human right. There is no discussion about that. And then we have other societal objectives to achieve. And fair water footprint actually implies having such kind of a prioritization. We believe we should look beyond water footprint and beyond our concrete water stewardship programs with the Alliance for Water Stewardship, with CDP, with Water Witness International. We're currently doing a study to test the feasibility to expand water footprint against or with a set of criteria that actually implies equity, and other criteria. We call it water effectiveness. We're doing so, and we believe it's going to take us, everybody, all of us, to look beyond efficiency alone. Thank you very much. And again, thanks for having me on this panel.
Thanks, Simon. I just read an MIT article on efficiency, that it only drives our short-term efforts, but with effectiveness and impact, we can actually expand our horizon. Thanks very much for bringing this forward. Before I go to the next speaker, I would encourage everybody who's listening in to put your ideas, questions, but definitely also what you want to bring to this initiative on the chat. There's not enough time to go into all your questions, but we will make sure, and FCDO will make sure that we will follow up as a coalition towards the Chatham House event, beginning of October, as well as towards the COP. So don't hesitate to ask your question, but definitely also put in what is that you or your organization or your coalition you have from anywhere, any place around the world that you want to bring to this initiative. We will make sure we follow up. And thanks, Andy Roby from FCDO for putting that question out. We really look forward to get your input. Then Simon, thanks. Onwards to Unilever, Willem Uyen. Also for you, Willem, the same question. What are your recommendations to drive this call to action towards sustainable and fair water footprints? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Henk. So I think for Unilever, as we have offices in over 190 countries and we have manufacturing operations in over 60 in our supply chain, we are really hoping to use our scale as a force for good. And we're building and operating sustainable supply chains. It's really critical for us to ensure business continuity, as well as to have some stability in predictable commodity prices and ensuring our customer and consumer satisfaction finally. Now, water security represents a real risk to our sourcing and manufacturing operations, as well as for our consumers, and hence also the products that we have. And climate change is projected to further increase the risks that we have on water security. But we also see this very much as an opportunity, because we are engaging in innovation and collective action to preserve and protect water resources, to create a future where everyone has access to safe and resilient water supply. Now, how we're doing that is that we do look at the continued risk management focused on the physical impacts of climate change, so the water scarcity and extreme weather. But let me be honest here that we have been on this journey now for the last 10 years, but we're still learning how to address and manage the shared risk that we have, such as water insecurity. And there's much needed, but it's also an area of tremendous opportunity. And therefore, last year, we've set out our next climate and nature goals, which include what we hope to do to tackle water security. And the first what we have there as an objective is that if we look at all of our product formulations and where much of our products finally end up in the water, into the water streams, if that is either a shampoo or a soap, or if that is, for example, a laundry powder, then we're looking to make absolutely all of our product formulations biodegradable, 100% biodegradable by 2030. And although we're very well underway there, there is still a part of our formulations that we definitely need to work on, and that is the first part that we see as fair water supply, because it also makes sure that the water supply that is available has no contamination in it. We see, secondly, the implementation of water stewardship programs around the 100 Unilever manufacturing sites that we have globally, working there together with the communities around our sites in water-stressed locations. And we're doing that by using the Alliance for Water Stewardship Standards. So Maheen, Malik, with what you just explained, we are well on the way in our pilot sites right now to implement your standards, and hoping to roll that out into our next group of sites very soon. We've also joined the 2030 Water Resources Group to drive more transformative change and build water management resilience in key water-stressed countries that we have, mainly in India, where I sit myself today, in South Africa, in Vietnam, in Brazil, and in Bangladesh. And lastly, what I wanted to mention is that we're looking to create new regenerative agricultural principles, because across most of the world, over 70% of the fresh water is being used for agriculture, and a lack of water can reduce the yields of the crop that we use as well for the production of our products. Now, these objectives we couple with what we're doing on the WASH programs throughout our brands like Lifebuoy or Domestos or Purit, and the creation of products that meet the growing consumer demands for lower impact and more restorative lifestyles. Things like, for example, the vegetarian butcher that you hopefully have heard of yourself, Henk. The last thing I wanted to say is that if I look at what we need, it's very much about leadership from businesses like ourselves and others, from governments, from cities and states and regions, to continue this virtuous cycle of action and ambition to expand in water management, not just on mitigation, but also into an adaptation agenda, and therefore also the innovation that we drive in our products to use less water is very important. And that means continued leadership on solutions to protect rivers, lakes, aquifers, oceans, policy reform on the value of water, and greater connectivity within governments between economic development, the health agenda, and water and land management. Now, if I think about a call to action, then we really think of that climate resilience needs a critical mass of stakeholders, and we're absolutely willing to play our part in there. So therefore, whilst we have programs on the way, we call as well on our suppliers and the businesses that we collaborate with to mobilize also their skill and the speed needed. And we do that together, hopefully with governments and investors, to make sure that water security becomes a central part in our resilience planning as well. Now then, last thing that I wanted to mention on what would success look like with the scale of operations that we have. We believe that we will continue to learn and are learning many lessons today. I hope that we can share these with other businesses as well and receive that from others to help us further. And I think success would be the wide-scale acknowledgement of the role that water plays as a nature-based solution, and therefore also from a consumer point of view. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Willem. And thanks for all that commitment in the business you already provide, and opportunities that also can lead to scale. And I think definitely lessons learned coming from Unilever's experience, but through your whole supply chain and working with your partners in that supply chain can help again bring this to scale. Before I go to Francesco, the last of the panel, Kate Lamb, and I already addressed it, but I'm going to make it more explicit for the businesses and especially the investors who are joining this conversation online, what does this initiative need to address in order for you to join? And not only what do we need to address as this initiative, what is the step in for you when it comes to investment? There's a little bit lines already to what Francesco might say. And then second, looking at the panelists, but also looking at the time, not sure if we will be able to address this question, but we want to bring this to the international and political agenda. And Klaus asked on the panel, what is needed, not only to have it impactful in your own environment and the way you work and try to bring that to scale, but also how can we allude this to a political global platform? But before that, go to Francesco from the investor and financial sector. We know from all the research and assets that no matter how much we talk about the amazing efforts we do, that still over 99% of all our money goes into stupid infrastructure that makes us more vulnerable instead of less. So we focus on the 1% with all these amazing initiatives. And we're becoming very happy, but how can we turn 1% into 5, 25, and then 100? Francesco, for you, that is a next question to the question of what are your recommendations to drive this call to action towards sustainable and fair water footprints?
Thank you very much, Henk. And we've done a lot of analysis on water over the last 18 months. And what we really think that we need is a transformational framework that is led by governments, not by investors. We can help, definitely, but it's not going to be led by charities and by investors. We need governments really to step in, because we've got a crisis, and we've got a crisis possibly that is comparable to the 1920s crash crisis in the States. And back then, they came out with institutions such as the SEC, and they put in place a compulsory auditing of the accounts. And I'll tell you why this is important, because the European Water Charter was published more than 50 years ago. That's a fact. It's been there and contains all the nice things that we have heard today, right, about what is that we should be doing. But the simple fact today is that 80% of the wastewater is untreated around the world. That's a disaster. So we're talking about 50 years of failure. Because why? Because the price of water is wrong. Water is a human right, and the price of water is the same for corporates and for people. That's not right, right? The water legislation is incredibly fragmented. So we need to stop about, and to a large extent, we have plenty of data about, water risk, but this is given by institutions that most of the times are charities. Yeah, and I, as an investor, I need to define water risk. I need to understand how the legislation is going to be changing. I need to deal with hundreds of bodies, and you cannot make investments in this type of situation. And what it is really required in that transformational framework is to recognize that water is essential to everything we do, but it's got a very specific component. We cannot use a linear framework, just saying, we use this water and then there's going to be some more water that it can come. Because water really requires to think about activities and investments in a circular manner, because water is both an input factor and an output factor. And that output factor has got massive implications on biodiversity, has got massive implications on nature. And within this type of approach, if you start to think about circularity, then we start to think about delivering solutions that are clearly sustainable and not just gray infrastructure, but we put together blue infrastructure and green infrastructure and the gray infrastructure together, because that is key. And with climate change, we are going to see more and more water stress around the world, and the current infrastructure will not work. It's not going to be easy because, unlike climates, water does not have a single solution. Sometimes the solutions are very local. Sometimes you can have a big sort of dam in some places without creating too much damage. Sometimes you can't. So, it is really a major challenge, but we will fail. We will continue to fail to deliver the investments required unless we recognize that water is a commodity, but is not cheap. Yeah, it's a scarce commodity that over the last 100 years has become scarcer. Yeah, we got less access to water today than what we had 100 years ago. So we really need to start to rethink about how we address water. But we can't ask just the investors to come out with the solutions, because the last 50 years since the water charter in Europe came about, the fact is very simple. We have not delivered on this. So governments really need to step in. The COP26 is a fantastic opportunity to create for water what we did in Paris for climate, and understand that without water, there is no life. So we can think about whatever we want, but water needs to be put back and being #1 priority to address sustainability around the world.
Thank you very much, Francesco. This is definitely true, and also in the context of the ambition of the UK government and others on the panel to make sure that water raises to the top of the agenda. That was also behind the resolution that was agreed upon last year by the United Nations member states to, for the second time in the history of the UN, for the first time since 1977, so that is a long time ago, to organize a United Nations conference on water in 2023. And the Netherlands and Tajikistan are the co-hosts, but of course this is a collaborative effort by public, private, NGOs and others to move our efforts, initiatives and commitments towards 2023 and ensure that we bring those commitments to practice, towards implementation and to scale. You also said, Francesco, a transformative framework led by governments. Such a framework could also be presented at the 2023 conference. And the other thing is that you discussed the price of water in the context of a human right. With the high-level panel on water, we came up with 5 water principles that were agreed upon by the world. Looking beyond finance in the context of water, but looking at values, to recognize and embrace water's multiple values to different groups and interests in all decisions affecting water. Second, to reconcile values and build trust, conduct all processes to reconcile these values in a way that are equitable, transparent and inclusive. And protect our sources, including watersheds, rivers, aquifers, and so forth. Fourth is to educate and empower, and 5 is to invest and innovate. 5 principles that help us guide also these frameworks to put our ambitions into practice. We're almost at the end of this panel. You were extensive in your answers to one question. You were able to build out many or more answers to that question. I only have one question left, and that is, how do we get this to scale? And I can't ask you all because I just don't have the time. So I will, as a moderator, limit myself to ask both Maheen Malik and Sareen Malik with examples from the ground up. What are, and be very short and sharp because of time. And I start with Maheen, and examples that you can bring to scale that will resonate on the global platform of governments, as you see around, private sector and investors from the NGO perspectives of AWS and SWA. Maheen.
Yes, so Henk, I think coming from what Francesco just also said, that, if there is a framework that's available that can be kind of scaled up. And I think AWS exactly provides that kind of framework that can be used in both local context as well as global context, because it kind of takes water to be a local commodity or a local resource by the end of the day. And when we talk about initiatives, implementing the standard itself kind of brings those examples, and exactly something that I said, for instance, in the textile sector, it brings an example where AWS implementation and adoption has created results. And that's exactly what we want to see when we see scaling up. It's the private sector coming forward, taking those incentives, implementing it, using it, and creating something that we want to scale up. And it's not something that the private sector is doing on its own. They're going to do it in collaboration. They're the one who will be involving the governments and the local NGOs as well. So I think that's exactly the kind of work that we want to do while we use this framework, which can be implemented all around the world, whatever the location is, whatever the nature of the business is, as far as it's using water as a resource and it's using it, it's using it extensively. So I'd say if you want to scale up, this is one example that you can take it, you can implement it in any part of the world, let it be Pakistan, Malawi, or Europe, and you can have examples that can, by the end of the day, come out and that can be shared globally with governments, with private sector and NGOs.
Thank you very much, Maheen. Very comprehensive, actionable answer, but also an example of the work you're already putting into practice that we can put on the table at the Chatham House event on October 5. Sareen,
yes,
from your voice.
You. Yeah. Okay, I think a bit what Maheen has mentioned in terms of multi-stakeholder partnerships, the various platforms that we have seen emerging over the past decade on the continent in particular, whether it be SWA, AWS, and 2030 Water Resources Group, are a good example of how we bring the various players, the private sector, the state and non-state actors, particularly civil society organizations, to the table. But Henk, I think the most critical thing is the resourcing of these mechanisms. They must have some resources made available to them or it will not move. And I believe that is really a clear example of whereby we saw resources being directed towards these initiatives, whether at the grassroots level, at the national level, and the regional, at the continental level, actually have some impact versus those whereby it wasn't quite sure who was actually going to be paying for the meeting, who was actually going to be doing the facilitation. So I think resources are really important. So a commitment, if we've heard here today, even for example, from Unilever, that they've been doing a lot of work behind it. And I can imagine there's a budget that has actually been allocated to this kind of work. So I think the first sign of commitment is, what are the resources that have been allocated, but also not considering as negligible the efforts that are done really at the grassroots level within the communities, just around those industries and those textiles. We are seeing quite a bit of work. So it's in terms of how do we scale that up, bring it up, and and elevate the voice and amplify the voice. Thank you, Henk.
Thanks very much, Sareen and Maheen, for these great examples. And I, of course, couldn't agree more. In the practice, and I think that is also why this coalition of government, private sector, small and big, investors, public and private, NGOs, communities, and individuals have to come together. And that means that you invest in people, in an enabling environment and their institutions and their mechanisms. Next to investing in the projects and programs and pipelines we so much need. It asks $1 million to spend $1 billion wisely. We often focus our attention on the billions that are needed to change the world. Those billions still sit in the 99%, although we have many great examples. But ensuring and bringing to COP the necessary resources to ensure that this process is moving forward is of critical importance. And I'm pretty sure that the community we gathered here, public and private, is willing and definitely able to provide those resources to bring this initiative towards COP and beyond towards the UN 2023 conference on water. We look forward to host you there. The UK government and Chatham House rules and Chatham House is looking forward to hosting you on October 5th. Andy Roby will already has put out a link in the chat where you can follow that initiative and also sign up. This will be an open conversation. We will reach out to the world. And there's Andy, perhaps last final words. Andy on the Chatham House event.
Thanks, Henk, and thanks everybody. It's been a great session. Just very quickly to warmly invite you all we want a multi-stakeholder approach to this. This is a partnership that will only deliver the sort of scale and results that we need if we work together. And if you have something to contribute, please put it in the chat and we'll follow up. The invitation is there. I think Lidovine has put it up again. Just been a great session. Thank you so much, Henk. Great sharing.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Minister Goldsmith. Thanks, Sareen, Nancy, Maheen, Simon, Willem, and Francesco for your excellent contributions. Thanks also for your commitment and the work you do, because Next to these contributions, in these conversations and sharing lessons, it's the commitment in actual practice. And I really hope that we find opportunities to bring you all together, not only in a conversation towards Chatham House, but definitely on the ground, somewhere in the world, to see how we can bring this partnership to real results. And those results we bring to scale and inspire the world to do much better. Thanks all very much. Have an amazing World Water Week, an amazing day. And thanks all for your commitment. See you.
Thank
around.
you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.